The old saying on the internet is no one knows that you're a dog on the internet, right? That you can't tell the size of the organization. And so all of a sudden the internet levels playing fields in many, many ways: distribution, branding, money, access, prejudice, those sorts of things. It has a lot of other implications, however, for the way corporations have to operate. They can't be as controlling. They have to let information out. They have to listen to their customers because their customers are talking to them, and if they don't, then their competitor will. So there's a long list of reasons why a more porous company, if you will, a leakier company, or hopefully a better term is a more transparent company, is a better organization. There are many business models which are predicated upon control. My favorite example is television or movie distribution windows. Well, I want to watch the movie whenever I want on whatever medium I want, but the whole economic structure of movies up until recently was organized around distribution in this format at this price and then wait a while. And in the new world, people won't wait. A good example is the recent story about delaying the Harry Potter movie, where the fans, and they're called fans because fans is a derivative of the word fanatic. The fans are so fanatical that they're demonstrating and they're writing letters and they're calling people on their private cell phone numbers and so forth to overturn this. Now, whether they made the right decision or not, I don't know, but the fact of the matter is they have a fan base that they have to spend a lot of time thinking about. There's a lot of evidence that groups make better decisions than individuals, especially when the groups are selected to be among the smartest and most interesting people. A simple summary, and this is the sort of wisdom of crowds argument, is that you can operate a company by consensus, which is indeed how Google operates, but you have to have two things. You have to have somebody who enforces a deadline. And by the way, if you don't have that, you have a university, because they just argue and argue and argue. And in a corporation, I think the role of a leader is often not to force the outcome unless they're really sure, but to force execution, literally by having a deadline, either by having a real crisis or creating a crisis. And a good managerial, let's create a crisis this week to get everybody through this knothole. And the second thing, of course, is that you have to have dissent. If you don't have dissent among a decision, then you have a king. And the new model of governance is very much counter that. And what I try to do, certainly in meetings, is I try to find the people who have not spoken, who often are the ones who are afraid to speak out but have a dissenting opinion, and get them to say what they really think. And then that provokes the discussion, and the right thing happens. So these open models, in terms of input from outside, also have to have open inside the corporation. It's an art, not a science, to encourage this, because there's so many incentives in the traditional companies, the big offices and the corner offices and the regal, bathrooms and all that kind of stuff, and the big long table and everybody dressed up in suits, that cause people to be afraid to speak out. But the best ideas don't come from the executives typically, and unfortunately the executives don't agree with me on that. It depends on where you are in the hierarchy. I would venture to say that people who work for the United States government still show up at 9 and leave at 5:30 with a half an hour break, and their productivity is defined by how much they can get done in the 8 hours that they do. And I would further venture today that it's not changed very much in 50 years. Obviously, that's not a business that's exposed to global competition and the sort of openness that I'm talking about. A counterexample would be people who are trying to make money in the blogosphere. So bloggers, for example, can't sleep because it's so competitive that if they go to sleep and a story breaks and all the clicks from their blog go to the other, so by the way, they all end up sort of disasters on a human scale because they can't deal with the fact that they can't even sleep. It's such a tense environment. So there's a spectrum in between. And you have to think about, as an executive, where you are in that spectrum, both personally and as an organization. It's probably the case that for senior level executives, balance is no longer possible. And the reason, and this again is very politically incorrect, because we're all supposed to have balance in our lives. But the fact of the matter is that I would love to have balance in my life, except that the world is a global stage, and that when I'm sleeping, there's a crisis in whatever country. I still have not figured out how not to sleep. So the fact of the matter is that you're going to select executives who like the rush of the intensity. They're going to be drawn to the sense of a crisis, the sense of speed. And those are the ones that are ultimately going to rise to the top. Innovation has always been driven by a person or a small team who has the luxury of thinking of a new idea and pursuing it. There are no counterexamples. It was true 100 years ago, 10 years ago, it'll be true for the next 100 years. Innovation does not come from people who are sitting in classrooms, studying books, going linearly through the material. And innovation is something, by the way, in your personal life that comes when you're not under the gun. So it's important that even if you don't have any balance in your life, I think that you have some times when you can get some reflection. So that you could say, well, maybe I'm not working on the right thing, or maybe I should have this new idea, or maybe I should call this person and ask them if I'm in trouble. Sort of the creative parts of one's mind are not on schedule, the nature of our human minds. So in our case, what we try to do is we try to encourage with things like 20% time and these small technology teams that are the 10% which are undirected. We try to encourage them to really think out of the box. We also try to look for small companies that we can acquire, because often it's small companies which have gotten started, but they can't really complete what they're doing, have some of the great new ideas. Google's objective is to be a systematic innovator at scale. So scale means more than one, and innovator means things which really cause you to go, wow. And systematic means that we can systematize the approach. We can actually get groups, and we don't necessarily know this month which one, but we know it's portfolio theory. We have enough of them that a few of them will pop up. And of course, we also cull them to make sure that the ones that are not doing anything and they're not very successful, we push them to try to do something different or retarget or in fact get canceled, although that's relatively rare. Executives always want to simplify the lives that they have. So they want to have 3 divisions and 4 products and all the people on this and all the marketing and so forth. And that may work in some businesses, but for most businesses, it is the nature of technology that they're going to become more complex, have more products, have more variants. And it's part of the competitive barrier to entry is to understand that and to actually have resilient, scalable, differentiated, and global products, which means they can't be built by 2 people anymore. And we recognize this. So in our case, while we recognize that innovation comes from small teams, and we organize it that way, we also encourage them to talk to each other. And one of the things that we've tried very hard to avoid at Google is the sort of divisional structure and the business unit structure that prevents cross-unit collaboration. And it's difficult. And I understand why people want to build these business units and have their presidents and you be in charge of this and that. But by doing so, you cut down the informal ties that in an open culture drive so much collaboration. If people in the organization understand the values of the company, they should be able to self-organize to work on the most interesting problems. And if they haven't, or are not able to do that, you haven't talked to them about what's important. You haven't built a shared value culture. In the principle that generals always fight the last war, everyone has studied the success of Microsoft and its Windows platform, and they're trying to replicate that. And one of the first and most important follow-ons to the generals winning the last war is that the next war is never like the last war. And so when I hear the word platform, I always say to myself, do you really understand what platform economics mean? Now, clearly, platforms are good because a platform enables third parties to build on top of or beside or so forth. But to build a successful global platform at a technology or at an engineering level requires a lot more work. It requires a real understanding of what the interchange points are. It requires a strong distribution strategy, whether it's hardware or software. And you have to come up with ways of making money from selling your platform. The internet does have platform situations, but the platform lock-in is much, much lower. It's very easy for people to switch from one product to another. Software is so fungible, it's very, very easy to move from one to another. So people, I think, overuse the term platform. There are a number of initiatives to try to build essentially global standards in these areas. Given the history of war and global politics and so forth, it's highly unlikely that we'll see a single regime, for example, for copyright law, or what content is appropriate, or what are the penalties for inappropriate content, all of the issues that people face in the online world. Today, the way this problem is solved is to use per-country domains. So the domain that's per country is seen as different as the U.S. domain, which is called .com. There are likely to be challenges to that, legal and political challenges over the years, and the internet has withstood every challenge so far, and I think that's the next one that will come soon. The most important thing to have in these kinds of situations is a large number of lawyers. And the reason is that the laws have become so complicated and they differ and they don't agree that to operate globally, and every large corporation I know of has this, they have the lawyer who understands Brazilian law and the lawyer who understands Turkish law and the lawyer who understands the European court. And of course, companies also have large lobbying efforts to try to influence the laws as well. In the case of information, and in particular cultural information, there are widespread differences of what's legal and what's not. The internet answers that question by saying that people are subject to the local laws. And indeed, you can have a local domain. It would be a tragedy if the internet, because of those issues, became balkanized at a physical level. It would be a tragedy if every country built sort of a police state around its internet. It's much, much better to use other approaches to make sure that what's legal in one country and illegal in another country does not go from the legal country to the illegal country without appropriate supervision.